know, and I mean going back a long ways, all these cardinals, we used to take a giant block of wood that cost about $20. You'd have to buy about 10 of them to get a good one, and carve it all up. And the most difficult part of all was carving and hollowing this part of the, if you're trying to make a legitimate cardinal, where it transitions from a turtle deck into a regular piece. Luckily, those days are gone, thanks to Mike Kajeski. And Mike has decided he's going to use a new system.
Hey, look, already done.
Who wants to buy a big block and carve it? Let's use a windy molded shell. You measure that out. Now what we did, it's oversized in every dimension, which is okay. And Mike's drop it in place. We just drop it in place and cut this undersized just a little bit, and then dress it off till it sits right down in place. Trim the front, trim the back. Total cost of the sheet is probably about a tenth the price, and you can always get decent wood in this. I don't even remember if we did this with a laminate. No, this is a one-piece one. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's taking out the little piece for the elevator here. All right, baby. Now you know it's going to be that you've got to dress it off little by little. Okay. So now get it so it'll drop down first. You got to take a little kerf off of there. Mike is a very fussy craftsman. He's going to do it his way. He's going to do it with one little sand there. I would take a knife and cut it. But when you're a craftsman, all right, just keep dropping it down till it fits. So we'll fast forward now, 4 hours into the future when Mike has this fitting. Now what we're trying to do is, I have a mold, a plug for the mold for the Typhoon. The Typhoon's over there waiting to be inked, but unfortunately Mike is taking up the whole day here. Anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to take a block and rough shape it and get this curve in it, which is the hardest part, by putting that curve in on the mold and just sandpapering it on the mold. And I want to see, we've never done this yet, so we want to see if this is going to work. And of course, if it doesn't, Mike can go buy a top block for $30 and carve it. Don't you miss those days? Remember with your dumb Magnum? We had a you were out there by the pond, chips were in the pond, the fish were eating balsa wood.
17 rolls of sandpaper.
17 rolls, $20. You got to hug and kiss Riley Wooten or Sig or somebody to get you a block. Thank God those days are behind us. Side thing we've been working on some pylon racing. These fit onto these FAI pylon engines, and you can see how this is my unique design where we're going to be trying. Lyle Larson's going to be trying it. These are a couple more special pipes I made up that are going into a P51, but they have to stick out the bottom at a certain angle. And of course, anytime I make one, I always make a spare. So we hope that we never need it, but if we'd have it, we have it right in a drawer ready to go. How you doing over there?
Okay.
All right. Now you don't want to make it, don't overdo it. You just want a nice tight fit.
We're getting closer.
All right, go little by little till you get that just the right size. Doesn't look like you got much to cut there. Couple more swipes. This is because we have a ½ inch. Okay, you can put a piece of sandpaper on there, and that should, when he gets the final, I don't know how close you're getting it there yet, get that final little curve right up in the front. The things we have is the original plug from making the Typhoon, and of course we put on some sticky back paper. I took a big block, and of course this is a 2-inch block, and we did it outside so we don't get the dirt and the dust. Actually, it's a little sloppy. Mike, you're getting sloppy.
Sorry.
Take it outside and sand some more off of this so we get that exact shape, which is not a whole lot different. Yeah, it's a little bit on the big side. Take it outside and do that. I don't want to have the dust in the house. Okay? Just don't take too much. We only need to get that curve. That's the part that's hard when you try to make a cardinal top, is getting that joint. Let's see, how'd it come out? Oh. What's hopefully going to be that curve. Then we can trace it from the back to get that curve. You can even do a lot of that carving and sanding outside. See how it fits.
Wait a minute, I gotta lock that door.
Okay, not too bad. Now we need to go to the back and trace out the back shape. back here, just trace that out with a pen, and we can carve away a lot of that extra wood. Okay, you got the glue seam on there? Okay.
As you probably can figure out, we got a...
Just like to do, here's what happens. If you don't put a little piece in there right now, you don't get the shape right when you sand it, because we're going to have to dress this off into this. So I want to have a slight taper going up into the rudder here. It's part of every job here. Now we're going to work on a block tomorrow, but that shell sanded in just about as nice as you could expect. This is coming along just the way we were hoping it would. And this will be one of the first Cardinals built specifically for a Sato. Make sure you leave enough material, because I don't want to tack it on and take it off. So what that's going to do, that's going to go right in place with a little extra wall thickness, and we're going to just fine tune it. You can't really, if you take it off hollowed, I'm just afraid it's going to not be strong enough. Now I'm guessing you could take a little more material out of the inside with some rough sandpaper if you want. Last little bit, one of those polywogs with some rough sandpaper. Yeah. Just so everybody sees the video, they know that you sanded inside your canopy block. But how much work is this compared to if you had to carve that? Imagine that whole thing. It's like a nightmare every time I think about carving up all these blocks. Now in today's mail, Gerald Champ, of course, he told me this was coming, so I'm looking for it. Anyway, Gerald, of course, is always sending me some cool stuff. And by the way, we're going to take his 80 this weekend. Zambelli's going to fly it. So, Jer, if he crashes, we're a dealer. We can get you parts. Anyway, he says, check out page 80 and 81. Now, check it out. I'll look at the whole magazine. Absolutely. I know what's in here. It's Typhoon. He's already told me. Oh, man. With retracts, Gerald, you're okay. Look at what this thing looks like with the retracts. The nose art. Now, see, that's one thing we haven't planned yet. We've been looking at a lot of different choices of nose art. You know, some of these squadrons have the number up right behind the spinner. Some have it on the rudder, both. Some of them have the number in the stripe. This is not an Invasion stripe one. This particular model has two different color letters. So many choices with British warbirds. Anyway, I'll read this and check it all out. I heard a great story today, and if anybody would like to email Chuck Holtzapple and encourage him, he's planning on building, he's got a 91 four-stroke, and he's planning on building a big warbird P-47, so he's in the Pampa email list. Chuck Holtzapple used to do a lot of work for, well, I ran the newsletter, and Chuck did basically all, he did what Karen does, he did all the typing. Tell me we won't get some ink line ideas. We're going to start our ink line soon here. And I have some other little tricks up my sleeve, as I always do. But if there ever was a nice picture of a Typhoon to get your blood boiling, unbelievable. Gerald, you are definitely okay. I don't care what Paul Walker says about you. Anyway, we'll read it, we'll enjoy it, and we'll pass it on to our friends. See, this is what I like. Wingspan, 97 inches. Weight, 47 pounds. Holy mackerel. I have kids that weigh less than that. Quadra muffler with homemade muffler. Prop, Zinger, 2412. Heavy duty servos. 6-volt airborne battery. Oh, man. I'm telling you. Laugh all you want. Anybody that does not think a Typhoon is an attractive model, they're probably right. Anyway, seem like, well, like Wendy would have all the time in the world to read magazines. You know, the truth is I don't read a lot of magazines. It's not because I don't want to. It's because I don't have any time. I work so many hours. And I'm not trying to make you feel sorry for me, but I have to tell you, look at these models. Look at the size of this stuff. But I do like to look at models, or I do like to look at the size of some of these models. And I'm never going to have the money to build something like this, and I don't have the inclination even if I had the money. But I do like to watch other people spend their money. With us now being a manufacturer for pylon tune pipes, I'm going to have to start paying attention to the results in the pylon world. I'm always looking for ideas for paint jobs, because here we're coming up on painting Mike's plane, painting Midgley's plane. Midgley has 2 planes to paint. To have some unusual ideas, and sometimes they're right under your nose in a magazine. Just imagine if they made ARFs for U-Control. How many more 1,000 people would be in the event? This picture, if you could buy a Typhoon like that, ready to go. Anyway, another good article. See, there's always things in these magazines. You just have to have them. A balsa planking article. Would that make a nice control line? I had a Tiger Cat, by the way. You always get ideas in magazines. At this year's Nats, we're going to be doing the jets and the giant scale. I always like to see some of the latest things going on in the world of RC. This desert camo job, talk about a nice job. With Tom McLean building at F104. I've been looking for F104, and if anybody has some information on F104s, please pass it on to our friend Tom McLean. Holtz Apple, you better build something. Chuck, I really do love the guy, boy. He had some nice stuff, and boy, he has always got the most unusual projects. Now, one of the paint jobs I've always liked. I've seen this in real life many times, and now, imagine, somehow you could work that into a control line stunner. Anyway, I know how to get even with Chuck Holtzapple. I'm going to send him that P47 video. This will get Chuck motivated. We got to get Chuck back in the hobby. We got to get him back full time. A nice little set of videos too for people that like the information, like to see some of the warbirds in action. And I have the whole set. I don't know how many there are. They're always out on loan, but anybody interested in any specific one, I'll be glad to loan it to you, of course. Okay, back to the shop. Back. Now, in a typical shop day, what I usually do first thing in the morning is I set up all the molds I'm going to run for that day. In this case, the gear mold, a Cardinal Cal, and Obra Cal. They're all set up, the material's ready. But I always have time while the PVA is drying or whatever to work on little detail projects. And today, one of the things I wanted to do, I wanted to take up, these are just a couple of the manifolds. We're going to be needing a pair or two for the Typhoon. I wanted to start grinding them up. And of course I want to Dremel out, make them a little more simulated than they normally are. You could use them, a lot of people use them just the way they are. I made up a set just to do a practice, because I want to get the rails as thin as possible. Of course, a lot of times you go through. Well, a lot of times what happens, the bird comes along and just eats the manifold on you. But anyway, the next thing is I want to take at least 2 of these and make up my little prototypes, hollow them out. I want to be able to look all the way into the exhaust pipes. I just like the way that looks. These have to be hand sanded with 80 grit, roughen them up, and then we'll get a coat of primer on them. And probably by then, I'll be ready to do my production. And then if Mike shows up today, and we don't know if he will, every day is an adventure. We either work on his plane or on my plane for a couple hours, or very soon we'll be going flying. It seems to work the best, and of course everybody's going to have a little bit different hand-eye coordination, but there's this little guy here, a ball end cutter. And I found that the easiest way to do this is to do it real slow. I got to turn the vacuum vents on, but I don't want to breathe the chips in. And the slower you can do it, you know, a lot of guys use these on, planes other than Stragers or whatever, or Typhoons or Spitfires. The idea here is just to make it as realistic as possible. They need to be thoroughly sanded before you put primer on them, though. Get some idea here of how much material that you can get off in a relatively short amount of time. We did get these kind of sanded, but we don't have weather to paint today, so we're going to let this go and work on Mike's canopy for a little while. But at least we get a little bit ahead on this. Now, one of the things that the block blended right in. What we needed to do, though, is because it comes to a razor point in the front, we put a little, like a knife blade of 64th plywood to keep that point. It's that point I want to keep. And at the end of the day, we'll put a little air epoxy light up there just to make it stronger in the front. You don't have to thin out that front till we put the air epoxy on there. Kind of a cockpit, that point is always a vulnerable spot for somebody sticking their fingernail in it or something. Take that little piece of plywood, we just slit it and drop that right in. And I guess we'll spend the rest of the we don't have a lot of time today, the rest of the time getting this body sanded out. But even on a little day like today, we get a couple little things done, the little exhaust done, get this sanded out, and we're one step ahead. It's looking good, Mike. As decided, we have just enough time here. Do the other side. We have just enough time to do the fillets. You got plenty of time. You don't have to rush. Mike is new to air epoxy, but he's going to like it at the end of this day. That's plenty. You just get it in the corner, pack it in. And it's a good lesson for anybody that has not used air epoxy yet. Now, whatever's left over, we can put in some of these joints, put it around the tail wheel, any place you want, because we're only going to have fillets on the wing, no fillets on the tail. That fillet on the wing adds a tremendous amount of strength, especially with, we're looking for some infinite lifespan here. Okay, that's good. And just get one of those 13-4 props, any kind of prop, top flight, doesn't matter. If you hold it straight up and down, you wind up with a small, relatively small fillet. If you lay the prop down, and you don't have to go slow, just go slow. You got it. It's almost impossible to make a bad fillet with air epoxy light. Okay, get rid of the extra. Now just get a razor and everything from this line out, snowplow off. There you go. Now even if you were to not take that off, it would sand off relatively easy. Give it another shot. Now I always use whatever little air epoxy's left at the end of making some fillets to fill in little dings and things that may not be. I like it a lot better than spackle, of course. Okay, just go right up to the front, then do the same thing up along the body. And this is just making your sanding job a little bit easier. I haven't seen many people that don't get a good result with this. And you have plenty of work time. You have almost an hour, 45 minutes or an hour. Take that off. And it's actually a little bit better if you leave it just a little bit rough and do the last little bit with sanding. You get a better bite on the paint. See, like that joint there, we could put a little, if we have extra, just smear some in there. To me, it's amazing how easy it sands. Now you have two choices. You can put your finger in alcohol, or the preferred method, spit. And get used to the taste if you choose spit. Now one, you get to do it once. Don't go back and forth 50 times. One swipe. Okay. Now if you want to really be cute, you can take a paper towel or a Q-tip and a little alcohol and just wipe some of this off, just so you have some time to do it. That's the fillet. Do it 3 more times, and you will call you Fillet King.
Yeah.
Or Peeps, whichever comes first. Now that's it. Take a little alcohol and a little Q-tips is even okay. Not difficult to do that at all. But even if you were to leave that on there, the sanding, that comes right off. And we put a little bit up by the canopy. The thing you don't want to do is keep wiping it 40, 50 times with alcohol, because the alcohol will weaken the overall strength of the air epoxy white. And if it's a little rough, don't even worry about it when you go to sand it. There you go. Okay, now because you have plenty of working time, you'll get all 4 of them done and be no big deal at all. And then whatever's left over, find all your little spots that need a little help. And there's always spots that need a little help. At last reached a day, and I hope we're going to get a good session in today, that we can start doing our ink lines. Put a couple quick tips. If this is the first time you've ever inked a plane, and you go through these tips, I think you'll have a pretty good chance of having a good result. There's several kinds of ink. You can go to the store and buy all kinds of ink. I'm going to try to be doing some of the ink with white, which is very difficult, by the way. If this is your first ink job, you probably want to stick with black. But if you notice, the common brands, this is Rapidograph, it says for paper, let me get this up close, paper and film. Well, paper and film is what we're looking for. Usually it would say, some of the inks say Mylar. Some of the inks, paper and film. Some of the inks don't say anything. This ink doesn't even have a label on it. Or some of the inks will just say India ink. Well, now you don't really know what you're getting. So my suggestion is find an ink that somewhere on it says from Mylar or film. Film is another word for Mylar. Now I always write the date. A bag for all my old ink. When ink is more than a year old, I don't throw it away because guys in the club want to practice with it or whatever. Let me just give you an example of, see, this is an ink that's not good. That's why it's in the bag. For paper. The ink that's for paper does not seem to work as well in our application. And I tried several times. One of the tricks you can do is put a couple of drops of alcohol in the ink. I've tried things like that with mixed results. There's no sure cure. There's only one real cure for it, for what we want to do, and that's use an ink that's made for, somewhere on the label it says for film. And I always would prefer a new, the little things are only a couple of dollars. Like I think the price was on one of these. Couple of dollars. It's enough to do 10 airplanes, but it's always a good idea to get a new fresh one. If you've been following my little adventures over the years, you know this is the set of pens I've had since the day I was born. They are really in rough shape. Every year I have to clean them. What cleaning a pen would entail is take it all apart, soak it in ammonia or some warm, really hot water overnight, clean it until you hear this sound. That little shaking, that means the ball check valve is loose. And usually out of the 6 pens you can buy, if you buy one pen, I just looked the other day in Pearl, one pen is $22. I think there's 6. 7 pens are $59. So I don't, buy a set because you're going to need, they glitch up. Another thing too is they have several different thicknesses. Now I don't even think you can read it on my set of pens. Oh, it's on the top. I don't put the right top with the right pen anymore. I just do it by eye. But a 6.0, a 5.0, that's a mid-range. About a 35. As they get down under 50, they get really fine. You can use them for touch-up. And then the ones that are bigger than 1.0, an 8.0 or a 1.0, and I think I got a 1.20, it's nice to have a variety of thicknesses in the lines. Up on the nose, you want the lines to be thick, and I'll spend a little time discussing this, because this would work even if you're doing a Cardinal or an SV11. laying out an appropriate ink job, it takes a little time to figure out exactly how to do it. It's not as easy as you might think in the beginning. It'll make it real easy if your hands are clean. Now, I really did a good job of cleaning my hand. My hands are never really this clean, and wherever there's cuts and cracks and bruises and stuff, I try to clean them, because the oil from your skin, as you're working on a plane and then you go to draw an ink line through it, and you get those little blisters. So that's one of the things. If you're comfortable using surgical gloves, it'd be a good time to do it. Or as another example, one day I remember doing it. I changed the oil in a car, and then immediately wanted to come in and do a day of working on ink, and I couldn't get the ink to stick, and it didn't dawn on me. All those fingerprints were on the whole plane. So I'm gonna even give it a shot using rubber gloves this year, even though that I've never done that yet. I'm usually more comfortable barehanded, but because I'm doing so much molding now, 3 to 4 hours a day I have rubber gloves on, I'm kind of getting comfortable with them. Now you would think most people would know how an airplane, the panel lines, or where the parts join would be on an airplane. Most people don't. Most people are modelers, don't have a big background, unless you're a real pilot or something. You don't want to have lines that are totally unrealistic. Just as an example, this is one of the books that we have for the Typhoon. If you were making a cardinal, there's no reason you can't use this type of lining. The point is, on a real arrow, if ink lines are done crazy, and there's people that I've seen that bought a real estate template that has triangles and hexagons and the shape of pianos and stuff, and just randomly that's not how an aeroplane is panel lined. Now, I like Al Raby's method the best. He lays the ink lines out on the actual plan. Some of the plans that I've seen that he's done, he lays out some of the ink lining pattern, just the rough ones. Now, another thing is, there's two theories here, and this is my theory. If you're wrong, it's better to be wrong and have one ink line not enough than one ink line too many. A lot of people that I've seen over the years have just gone crazy, and they just start putting X's and O's everywhere, and I think it detracts from the plane. With letter-sets and ink lines, one less is better than one too many. So in this case, I can tell from having been around real airplanes in museums and things that these covers from this line forward get removed relatively often, and usually the gaps and seams are thick. From here back, they don't take. You can see where the Zeus fittings are. These don't come apart all the time, so they're relatively thin. So if you're going to do an ink line job with more than one line of thickness, keep in mind the thick lines go to the front, thin lines to the back. That would be a good general rule. And there's one final thing, and it's something I like to do. No matter what you do, whether it's painting, sanding, whatever it is, and you need to develop a little hand-eye coordination, it's good to do the bottom first. I'll just write this up as the bottom first. These are things that sometimes it isn't obvious, especially to people that are relatively new. But if you do the bottom first, you kind of make all your mistakes, get the pens flowing, get your line, figure out how you're going to tape these things down. Do all the stuff on the bottom. And then, when you're real comfortable, and only then, flip it over and start doing the top or the outboard wing. In our case, we're going to start with the bottom of because it's a take-apart plane. See, this is real nice. I can do the bottom of the tail. I can hold it right in my hand. Very easy. Very difficult when the plane is all in one piece. That ruler is always hitting a rudder or a flap or something. The more parts you can have the plane break down into, the easier an ink line job is by a power of a lot. Now, typically, I would spend in the past, if you go back, and we have all these videos available, the Seafire, the Spitfire, the I-beam, all of those videos, I spent weeks doing the ink work, a little bit at a time, because in my case, my eyes are relatively bad, and I get fatigued where I start getting a headache from looking at ink and rulers. But I like to do a day that I'm not distracted by having to go out to the car, go out to the pond, go out to shovel snow. I like to have a dedicated day because keeping my hands clean, keeping the pens flowing, it's hard to do it and be interrupted. It's not like if you're just sanding silver. You can sand silver and do other things. But it's hard to do. Look at this. Can you get out of here? You can't even, this birdie just walks out onto the storyboard. It's hard to do two things at once. Ink lines is one of the things you really kind of have to concentrate on. So these are a couple of tips I hope, this is like the little windy do's and don'ts, and if I think of any more, if you're starting off and you go in this direction and you pick up a couple of videos, an excellent one is the I-Beam Spitfire one. That goes, it's pretty quick and concise. It goes over a lot of the little details that maybe we're going to skip over. I don't want to I don't want to over-incline a plane. It's better if I'm in doubt to do a few less. I always feel like a few less is far better than just overdoing it and having too many of these things that don't match. I'll get the pens cleaned up. I'll clean the pens and get busy here. In my case, to have some kind of a reference. The reference being that I want to get an idea of how many lines are on the plane. In the case of the Typhoon, they look very easy to replicate. I want to having a few reference books just to show different things. Now, supposing you're doing, let's pretend you're making a Cardinal, an Impact, an SV11, whatever, and you don't really know where the incline, well, this would give you some idea. You just wouldn't start inserting things everywhere. Gives you a rough idea what a nose section, even other than a Typhoon. Almost all World War II planes split along the top of the exhaust because this part of the cowling comes off. And then they need to service the engine. These parts, Zeus fittings, come right off. So we have a little way of replicating the Zeus fittings. Even that, but to just get a little idea what the lining, and we're not trying to make every line. This is not a scale model. But I'd like to get the overall look of what does that look like when it's the color pictures. That's why I say it, having a library of books, and I want to thank everybody again that sent them in. For instance, on this one you could see the line on the top of the exhaust. We know we're going to have to put a line up there. You could get a rough idea how many Zeus fittings there are. It's not a scale model, but it still adds a little dimension of, ooh, that, without even telling the person looking at it, it looks realistic. It kind of fools your eye. And gee whiz, that's what it looks like. And you don't really even realize it until you look at it quite a while. This thing is I always put a terry cloth towel that's been in the wash on my glass table because I want a hard surface. I don't want to work on foam. Then the thing is rocking back. I want to work on a hard surface but have a little bit of cushion that I'm not, number one, putting dents in the plane or a little glue chunks. So I always have Karen or myself, we wash the towel first, lay it out nice and flat, and this is my work surface. Then I go to my drawer and take out all my templates and try to look at which ones would be appropriate. This would be for doing over a wing. These are Spitfire ones. A box of junk like this probably costs $20. You can get, you don't need new ones. These in fact they're broken. I picked them up. But what you do need to know, and this is the most important thing of all, wherever you're going to do an incline, that has to sit up off of the part. Now see, that tape holds it up off the part. If you just take a flat one, like if we were to use this one, and this is laying right on the surface and ink it, the ink will run under the end. So you need to jack this up off of the part. I like the thickness of 2 or 3 pieces of masking tape. Now just to make a point, I had this one for 20 years already. Years ago, I'd go to the drafting store, and being honest about it, and I'd buy a bunch. I'd buy ones and without concern. I'd go, oh, that one looks good there, that one and the plane looked like a checkerboard. And I never realized planes don't have pianos. In this case, I was putting on baby grand pianos and picnic tables and toilets. And this one John Brodak gave me, very difficult for me to get a pen in there, a thick pen. I don't know if they use that for a pen, but certainly all these other ones we've used. And most important, on a World War II plane, Zeus fittings. These are already spaced, but it's hard to drill these holes equally unless you have a milling machine or something. But you can buy these. I think John even sells it. This is a Top Flight one. I got that from John Brodak as a gift. Some of these that look appropriate, that would be gas caps or whatever, just as some of the choices. Again, some of the templates have a reverse angle, so you don't need that. Now this happens to be one of them. See that everything is cut back on an angle. I've never really been able to use this. It holds a shape, but we'll give this a try. And these are real handy, having all these French curvy things, and I usually make my own from rib templates. By the time I'm done, this is a real handy one for doing rivet lines. And keep in mind, rivet lines, like on the Spitfire and Seafire. Rivet lines are very effective. Now we have little, very closely spaced ones that are spaced far apart. On a plane, a real plane, all the rivet lines would not be identical. The ones that are in high stress areas would have more rivets than out on the back of the fuselage. So if you have the material to look at, you're really one step ahead of the game. And if you have, and I think this all came from John Burdick, I'm pretty sure it did. But anyway, all these little riveting templates, and some that you may or may not use ellipses and whatever. So what I try to do is during the year, I keep them all in one box, because we always have people in the club and friends that borrow things. And it's nice if they add a couple things to the pile, fine. If they don't, it's not a big deal. But to have everything in one area, have all my ink in one area, and have lots of books to go reference off, and I'm pretty much ready to start inking. Get that bird out of here. That bird's going to kill me. I don't know if you're going to be able to see this on a video, but one of the things I did years ago, this was in 1989, this was a foam wing plane, the Sidewinder, and if you look, I inked in the ribs. I just made ink lines like it was an I-beam plane, and I thought that was kind of a nice, it looked, of course now we're not trying to replicate World War II things, that kind of made a foam wing plane look a little bit more like, like a plane that might be a lot more labor intensive to build. Again, but a very simplified ink pattern. It's not a crazy fish tanks and everything all over the place. It's a relatively simple inking pattern. And on this plane, I even inked in the lightning holes in the back of the body. I don't know if you can see them between the wing and the tail, like a Gieske Nobler. Doing your first ink job, this is one that I did that's real simple. It's a box. Just a box around things. It dresses it up. It gives it the illusion that you've spent some extra time, and yet it's really simple to do. As I said before, this is one of the planes I did years ago that, notice there's no rhyme or reason to the boxes. It looks like a flow chart for a flush toilet. There's no rhyme or reason. To me, this was not a good inking job. The back of the body was just dots and dashes and slashes, and the flaps, I mean, just random things. Not a good choice, and this is what we're trying to avoid, especially on a semi-scale plane. Look at a real plane, the Zeus fittings at the front, so they can access the engine. From that point back, I would say there's still things that get taken apart relatively often, but in the back, you can use the very thin ink lines, very effective to use them that way. So that's what I did with the Seafire, up in the front, thick ink lines, Zeus fittings. And toward the back it got thin and just turned into little rivet lines. And I thought that was pretty effective, relatively effective for a semi-scale model. Notice the way Al Raby inked in a very, probably almost totally prototypical manner, very realistic and not overdone. It doesn't take your eye off the good aspects of the model. And on Miss Ashley, where we had a relatively prototypical. Now you see the lines are getting thinner and smaller. Anyway, I hope those tips and those ideas give you some overview of what we're trying to accomplish in the next couple of days while we're inking it. We're also trying to flip-flop back and forth with doing other modeling projects here. Of course, we're in the middle of making a bunch of tune pipes and working on Mike Kajeski's Cardinal, which in itself is going to need some ink somewhere down the road. So, but keep in mind, this is not a one project shop. We'll see the rivet lines here, what I'm trying to show. I thought they were very effective. We're riveting around the cockpit. Lines getting thicker, Zeus fittings getting bigger up in the front. Little exhaust manifolds. The more little detailing you can put into it, I think the better it is. Anyway, let's get started. I always start with, just take any one of the pens, in this case it's a medium pen, and I want to just write for a while on a piece of paper because it flushes out from cleaning the pens any like I said, get out of here. I'm going to start on the bottom of the I'm going to start by inking you. Get comfortable with the feel of the pen. Here are a few things you can't do with these pens. If you try to lay the line, nothing happens. The pen has to almost be dead straight up and down, or at worst, maybe 1 degree back. Whenever they stop writing, sometimes you can get them to write just by clicking them on and off again. That is also another thing. If you go to church on Sunday, sometime on Monday they write real well. If you skip church, Monday, the bird usually gets the better of you. But anyway, once I get this pen flowing, and I like to do this, take about a 5-minute cycle of getting this pen to write before I go out and try to write actually on a painted surface. Because from cleaning the pen, there's usually a little bit of residue up in the tip, and it usually makes you crazy right in the beginning. So I'll try to get a couple of these pens flowing. As soon as I'm comfortable that they're in good shape. Now, of course, you could go buy new pens every time. Lou Dudka had a great way of doing it. At the end of inking a plane, he threw the pens away. I really liked that. Of course, Lou had a lot more money than I had. Anyway, I'll get another one. So I have 2 here. Now, a lot of times one will be a lot better than another. That's why it's nice to have a set. If you only have this one, looks like it's doing a lot better than the original one. And they're both mediums. So we're going to start with a pen that's I have the outline of the back of the tail, what it looks like. Now, a lot of the things that I do, I've come up with these techniques for, you always keep this handy, by the way, so that before you ink, you can just go scroll on that, and then a lot of times you're trying to ink something, and just give you a little example of something that I found to be real handy. And you have a ruler, and what happens is, while you're trying, now let me show this is another little thing I forgot to put on. You can buy these rulers that have cork on the bottom, so now the ink doesn't flow underneath. That's really nice, and you see they kind of stay in position. But I always wind up putting a couple little pieces of tape to hold it in position, because if you're inking and you start here and you get down here and it usually smears the ink line too, which really gets you aggravated. But you have to get that ruler up off the part by, a couple of layers of tape anyway. That I have to do, because you can get a look at how messy this ruler is. I've been trying to clean it up. Keep in mind, a lot of people borrow and use these tools. These are shop tools. They're not like my personal little stash of stuff. So before I'm going to ink, I'm going to take the ruler edge, make sure there's no little glitches on it. And this doesn't hurt it at all as long as you do it with a block. I also have a real nice long ruler that I got from John Pothier. I'm going to put some tape along the back of it, so that I'll have a few choices of rulers. Sometimes I'll want it a little thinner. Have some thinner rulers, and you can see I have the tape on here, and I have that nice new one. But again, the edges, if there's one little glitch on the edge, it'll pick up in the ink line, especially on a thin ink line. So you want the rulers to have a little, I don't know what you would call it, a little support, so it would stay up off the part and the ink wouldn't run underneath. Example of what I was talking about, because I'm watching footage to get some more segments for the way we were. Ted Fancher's friend, by the way, it's good to always be getting that. You see how accurate, and of course Ted being very familiar with how airplanes are put together, it always has a nice look to the way he puts them together. But look at how this gets up by the nose, the Zeus fittings around the fillets, and not overly busy, all at the same time. Simple patterns, effectively done, and relatively realistic. It sets off even a traditional model that isn't a semi-scale model. Prepping up a ruler, see, because we use these rulers, these are not just, hang them on a shelf toys. I want to make sure there are no big globs of epoxy or CA or anything like that, because it'll gouge into the model. I want to make sure that side is perfectly clean. It sounds like this would be self-evident, but you'd be amazed how many people I've seen down here doing their first ink job. The first thing they do is press it down, run an ink line, pick it up, and it's some kind of big gouge in there. Anyway, I want to make sure that's clean, and then I want to get the tape right up, say, within a 1/16 of an inch of the edge. And because this is a nice long straight ruler, we'll be able to use this probably on the fuselage. And boy, if there's any big advantage to a take-apart plane, right now is when you cash in your chips. You've spent all that time making the hatches and getting the screws and everything, and now it's payday. Because doing it with this tail in your hand like this is so easy relative to if you go back and look at the Seafire videos. Man, it was a struggle. Just doing the side of the fuselage is usually the worst. And then people tend to take shortcuts and maybe not do as good of a job as they can or leave out steps. Anyway, the rulers are ready to go. The pens are writing. Ready to lay some ink on the paint. What I did is I always like to do some inconspicuous spot for a little practice. But what I always do is lay out where I want the major lines to be, because then I can move them and get them equalized. Then I ink that in about a 1/64 of an inch. Just looking at the book, again, it's not a scale model. I want to get the look and the look and feel of the Typhoon. This looks about as busy as it should be for the stab. Hardest part of any ink job, is to get the corners right. And I want to show my little technique. We're going to do a lot of inking here, but I want to show the technique. Usually when two corners come together, they'll do this or they'll do this, but they almost never, unless you're a professional draftsman, come together like that. But what I do is let the ink totally dry, and don't try to do it while it's wet. Let me get on a macro lens and show how I get one corner equal here. Now in the beginning, while I'm doing this, they're probably sloppier than normal, but there's always a little bit of extra ink. If you let it dry, take a brand new XL blade and just clean up anything that needs to be cleaned up. And if I have to, if I go too far, I'll just re-ink that line. Now here's another little spot. I don't know if you can see this little mistake right here. Once ink is dry, and before you put clear on it, you pretty much can either wipe it off with a Q-tip with alcohol, carefully of course. Now if I don't get the corner exactly the way I want it, I'll go back and re-ink that corner. And then of course just using a brand new blade. A blade is, let's see another one here. We got another one. This is probably the part that frustrates people doing this the first time, is getting the corners. But the corners being over. And in the worst of all worlds, if you scrape too far and go down to the substrate, get that little touch-up. I have my touch-up brushes right by the side of the table here. Let's see how this one looks. So each little segment, now this would be the bottom of the stab, and a good place to practice, by the way. Oh, here's a great one here. Even more, almost like I did this on purpose. See how the lines overlap? And I always use the tape as a... Now that's probably going to require a little touch-up there. What happens though, after inking for a couple hours, you get better and better at this, but in the beginning, it can be frustrating. And when you look at it, now that it's back to the normal size, once we put a coat of clear on that, and what I like to do, as soon as I get the ink to the point where I think it's acceptable, get a quick coat of clear on it. Do a couple of these in real time, but just the thought, if you have the tape on here, and of course I rub it up on my shirt first and I lay it down, I can get some idea of just how that's going to lay out. On a line like this, I want to get the spacing equal, so I use the thickness of something, either a ruler, or measure it out on the tape. Use the tape as a way of measuring it. In the case of these little squares, what I do is I work off the template using the edge of the template as my reference. So I know they're both the same amount in and the same amount from the back, making it symmetrical without a lot of extra work. At the end of it, just carefully pull up the tape. If the tape tends to stick a little too much, use the old John Brodak trick. Just heat it a little bit with a hairdryer. In this case, we rubbed it up on a flannel shirt, so it tends to pull up relatively easily. Then when I'm all done with all the tape off, I can look at it and see, gee, does it look just about like what I'm trying to achieve? Okay, so I think we're pretty well set, and I feel confident enough now after working with the pens we can lay out the top. And they don't have to match, by the way. Most planes, in fact all planes, they don't match. It's not a mirror image from one side to the other. What I want to do is in the same way, using tape, lay out whatever line work I want to have, a little bit oversizing tape, and lay this out with ink. I'm trying to concentrate. I'm going to try to get all the bottom pieces of the stab and elevators done, and then get a coat of clear on them. Get out of here. Leave me alone today. Now another thing, I always think it's important to have the two pieces, as many pieces together when I'm laying this out, so I can make sure, like if these two lines were going to line up, I can do it a lot easier this way than if I just do them freelance. Whenever I lay out lines that are going to be 90 degrees, say to a hinge line or to something else, I want to be sure I use a 90-degree triangle. In this case, one piece of tape will hold that in place so it can't wiggle around, and now I can just lay out the tape. Anything that's 90 degrees, because even if this is off just a little bit, it's an unnecessary thing. It only takes a second to check it with a triangle. One of the harder things to do, or difficult, is to get a line that wraps around an edge. So what I do is I leave one side and I'll just bring it down to the end, but I won't go all the way around until I do the other side. Then I'll line this up and work from this side to the front. Always easier to lay everything out with tape. That is such a good idea. These look a little pretty prototypical, and that was on our little sketch there. So I'm going to try to incorporate the little, I'm sure that's a hinge, incorporate that right up in here. To using 3 different thicknesses of line. The trim tabs, because that would be a real gap, I want those ink lines to be thicker. These little simulated hinges I thought worked out well. Same thing up here. Now these are the wraparound lines. Now what I do is once I get the line there, I take the thinnest pen I have and do it by eye and just work my way right around there. And then of course before I go any further, before I even flip it over, I want to get all the corners. Now you can also, another good trick is when you're using a wide pen, see how you kind of get a radius corner? Well, I can take the real fine pen and just draw a little corner up in there. Just freehand it right in. And all these little details, it doesn't sound like, you would even notice them, and especially this is the bottom of the plane. Believe me, you notice them. When you put this plane in, and it's all buffed out, any little imperfection you're going to see on there. Now, in the time that I was shooting this video, a funny thing happened. My tripod broke. So I have to have a friend deliver another, one of my friends have a spare tripod. In the meantime, I don't have a tripod. Now, what I wanted to do, as soon as I get one, and I should have one later today, I wanted to shoot doing the ink lines, doing the little rivet heads, trim tab, a thicker line, some of these lines, medium lines. It's the difference in the thickness of the lines that makes it very three-dimensional. It tricks your eye into looking at, see from some angles you almost don't see the rivet heads, then when you look, ooh, they all come into focus. Your eye is focusing at different lengths, and that's what makes this, just like in a professional art thing, you're trying to fade the background out and bring the things into focus all the time. The trim tabs being a little bit thicker, that's parts that would have a gap. The other panel lines, and again, this is not a scale copy, it's just supposed to look similar. Now, I always give this about 5 minutes to dry, then I'm going to flip it over and do the top in exactly the same way. But it's not a mirror image. Remember, it's similar, but not exactly the same. It adds a little interest in there, free extra interest. I'll show you how to do ink lines, Ertnowski. I'll show you where panel lines are. Well, I'll tell you, he makes me crazy while I'm working here. Hey! Incline bird. Little tool that I found handy. I just put some tape on a brand new blade so that I could scrape those corners down. And I noticed it's easier to do it because what you want to have, and you don't want to have the point scratching down. You want to have this laying flat, and you just want to kind of shave it. That seems a lot more effective, and it's easier to control without that big handle on it. I can just scrape the corners with that. Another thing I noticed, I'm trying to get used to using these surgical gloves. The gloves pick up all this little ink, so every once in a while I just go get another pair of gloves. The gloves are relative. I guess I'm getting used to them from all the molding, but I know at one time I tried to use them and I went crazy. I felt like I had boxing gloves on. It seems less cumbersome today. You might want to give that a try. By fenders, I want to keep this flat, and I need to take into account the horn is already going to be leaving this. If I didn't have this blocked up, I would have to deal with that horn and everything would be on an angle. So this allows it to be flat, a lot easier to lay out all my symmetrical lines. Just 2 scrap blocks of wood. Laying this out in tape, the critical thing is when these lines wrap around, I want them to wrap around and be equal. And I want to check everything with my 90-degree triangle again. And I also want the lines, and you can see them coming around, for my little trim tab to line right up. And then I'll connect the 2 little ends, I'll leave it blank, and then connect it with the very thin pen. Okay, now the last thing on this step, I'm going to pull up all the extra tape, and do my touch-ups in the corners, edges, angles, whatever, see if I need to adjust anything. Another thing, using a really fine pen, if you have a spot, you have a spot right there that's not really right, I can just hit that with the razor and then just go along one edge with a finer pen. And I want to see that all the lines are connected in the back, because it really looks lousy if you put it over and it's like when you have one tooth missing in the front. So the next step for this is going to be to put a coat of clear on, but I'll do all the clear at once. I'll work up to the point where I have as many parts as possible and set the gun up for the clear and try to do it all in one shot. Another good reason to wear the gloves. I had the gloves on and I was putting some ink in a pen and I spilled it. Well, not a drop on my hands. Hey! Get! The gloves saved about 20 minutes of cleanup. I just go put another new pair on, I'm ready to do the next part. The piece I can work on is the rudder and the little end part of the fuselage, which I'm going to lay out what I think. Of course I'll do it, I'll lay it out in tape a little bit, get some idea of how I want to do it. The defining feature of the tail is this big trim tab, which I'm going to try to lay out in tape first, and then lay out the rib locations. They don't have to be scale again, but let's see if I can incorporate that in. I'm trying to get that proportion about right. Trim tab outline will be a little bit thicker than all the other lines. The other thing, when I drew a line like this, now I have to wait till that dries. I don't want to lay a template back over this. This is why I try to lay everything out in tape. Then I can work in areas while one is drying, I can be working at another station. Those 2 lines, now I need to wait and then lay it out on the other side, being real careful. I'll use the thinnest pen I have to connect the lines, but to make sure they're in pretty good alignment. And what I did, I used this 90-degree triangle, 90-degree T-square, to make sure these 2 are 90 degrees. It's that trim tab that's the dominant feature here. Finally have a replacement tripod. Now notice, and this is similar to the Spitfire, it must be typical of British construction, there's a rivet line equal to each rib, and it goes right across the whole rudder. So we're going to try to simulate that with rivet lines. And this is the first time I'm showing this. This is my own way of doing it, and certainly nothing sophisticated. You can see the marks on the ruler, and I use these with a medium pen. These are the lines, and I'm guessing they're 1/10 of an inch. What I try to do now is line that up right with a line, because this is the way the real ship appears anyway. Kind of line that up and start at one end, and I need a little. I just start laying out the dots. Now, of course, the trick is not to make all the riveting exactly the same, or it starts to look like you have decals or something. By varying the spacing, the thickness, you can achieve a lot of nice little optical results that, to me, make the ship more interesting. It makes it that you can't see it all at one time. Because as you're looking at one thing, the other thing is coming into focus as you get closer and further away. Now that's one line of rivets. And I'm going to repeat this, and they're in parallel lines going right up. Now this is really where you get a bonus from a take-apart plane. This kind of stuff on a plane that's all in one piece, the word nightmare isn't even worse. It isn't even bad enough. When it's in take-apart form, this will go in about a tenth of the amount of time, and I think it'll be nicer even. This is where, at least in my case, my eyes start getting tired after about an hour because I'm focusing in. And of the 10 pair of glasses that I have, none of them focus at this length. Anyway, you can get a lot of nice little, you can try on blank sheets of paper if you see. You want to get a variety of different incline patterns, because if they're all the same, it really, I don't think it accomplishes what we want. Now the last one, I don't know if we're going to go up along the edge of the fuselage here. Maybe we're going to have to figure this out. Yep, we're going to be able to make that last one. Common thing that happens, because I had the ruler on a curve, it ruined some of the little rivets. Now, you can always use alcohol, of course. Water is fine, and you can just lift them. What I'm doing, I'm turning the Q-tip. A little spit or a little alcohol, and I'm turning it. What I've done is lift it right off the part. Now I can go back, let this dry for a few seconds. No matter how careful you are, there's always these little repairs. Now I can relay the ruler out. And the reason I didn't lay the ruler on this side was because I didn't want it, these were still wet. As I do this, I'm trying to look to see if I'm going to be happy with these lines, if they're the right width, thickness. It looks pretty well laid out to me anyway. Now I wanted to do some lightning holes in the fillets, and I have a template that has decreasing radius holes, so I thought that may be one thing I could do to add some interest to that part of it. Template, this is one of the ones that doesn't have raised edges. I need to put that tape on there, then I can work it down this way. It's a little visual interest too. Well, needless to say, I'll just repeat the whole procedure for the other side. This is probably going to be all we're going to get done today. I managed to finish up the tail, I'll call this the tail section for lack of a better word. What I want to do now, I got a little time left today. I also outlined everything here with a thin pen, just to make it a little crisper. What I want to do now is put the whole fuselage together and start laying out, because I have a little time left. Again, some of my other ink lines, I can do this in pieces. I don't need to be doing it all in one session. So let me get the fuselage all pieced together, and we'll try to get a little bit done on a fuselage today. What I'm going to do, I had put this all together. What I'm going to try to do is, from the drawing, I can see a lot of the lines are parallel to these lines, so I'm going to try to lay some of these out just freehand with the tape, of course. This is quite a big fuselage, by the way. I want to lay it all out with tape, and using this for kind of a reference point, try to simulate some of the lines that they have. Now, some of them are rivet lines and some of them are panel lines. The first thing I'll do is, using a ruler, line up these rivet lines as they all on the prototype go right forward. Doing this kind of a line where you want to continue a line, it's important to line up the rivet behind it so you don't have two rivets coming together either too spaced too wide or too close. And again, this is one of the things very, in my case, very time consuming, because I really want this to be as accurate as possible. And I want to maintain as much of the prototype look as I can. Now because of the shape of the fuselage being curved, I don't want the ruler to move in the middle of doing a set of rivet lines. So what I do is put two little pieces of tape. Now that stabilizes the ruler. Now I can get the pen. And I can start at one end. It doesn't matter what end I start at. And I can work my way right up to the next. The next level would be by the invasion stripes. I'm not going to go past the invasion stripes. I just want to carry this in for now and make sure every step of the way that the things I'm doing are lining up. I'm going to try to work from the back toward the front. And with each one of the lines of rivets, make sure that they line up and that I don't have a gap where it's obvious that this is a take-apart section. I'd like to disguise that, and the lines going through it, if they're accurate, it helps to some degree disguise that anyway. So if you have the choice of combinations of thin lines, thick lines, rivet lines, wide-spaced rivets, closely spaced rivets, the variations in pen thicknesses, and what we're going to do is probably later on, and probably tomorrow even, if we're going to do the Zeus fittings up on the nose, and you're aware of how these seams get thicker and thinner on a real airplane, it's a very significant thing. And it just makes it possible that even on a Cardinal or even on any of these, a plane that wouldn't be a World War II ship, it'll have the look of a real airplane instead of something other than a real airplane. And once that's lined up, it works its way right forward. We're going to end at the invasion stripes, so I'm going to try to do all the lines behind the invasion stripes right now. Anyway, the next thing I want to do is I want to continue these rivet lines through here with solid lines, and I want to outline all the edges of the yellow just to make it a crisper outline. And then that'll carry me from, as I'm working to the front, all the ink lining will be up to the end of the invasion stripes, and then the last section I'll do is that nose section. You can see how they're just rivet lines going straight forward to be prototypical. So now I'm going to leave off these little reinforcements. I don't think that adds anything to the model, and it would, if it was a scale model, it would be important. That just looks like a zipper or something back there. But I want to next get these lines up to the end of the invasion stripes, and then maybe work on those hatches, this front part up by the canopy. To get an alignment on this, because once you lay the ruler on top of this, you can't see the tops of the letters, and I don't want these to go wandering off either, is once I do that, then when I lay the ruler in place, I can use the bottom of the tape as my reference line so that everything stays nice and straight. I'm outlining all the letters, and I can outline them with a medium pen and then put all the little points and edges on with a real fine pen. But that just makes everything just a little crisper when it's done. But it's real important to keep this type of thing where everything stays parallel. Now I got both sides of this done, believe it or not. This went quickly. The problem with all these, when you're going over an edge with a black ink line, what's going to happen is when you sand it clear, this line is going to get little spots showing through where a little step is. But it doesn't matter, because we're going to, after we recoat the clear, maybe do a little razor touch-up with the finest of the pens. I laid in what I thought was a good replication, and now because we don't have a scale fuselage, we don't have the choice of, see this little hatch right here? And I had the template from one of the top flight ones, which looks about right. Because again, we don't have a scale wing, so now we have to get into fudge mode. Need to tape around the whole part, because the next thing I want to use is be able to connect these lines to these lines, and I need a reference point. Then I'll do the whole nose as a separate segment. Now when you want to go around this, see what I've done is I've gone, let me just show, maybe I'm forgetting some of the steps here. I've gone halfway, let it dry. Then I'll work from this side up, go halfway. And then where they join, if there's any overlap, I'll be real careful to blend it in. Long straight line from the cowl brake back. Of course I have to interpolate, but having that big long ruler lets me pick up the back end, lay out that line relatively nice and straight. Inked in a little bit of detail around the cockpit. Added a few lines, thin ones, thick ones. One of the details that's on the fuselage itself is that I'm assuming it's some kind of an access hatch. But anyway, this is the end of day one, our wonderful day one of ink lining. We have a little family get-together going on upstairs, so I'm not going to belabor it. Be back here tomorrow and try to finish up the fuselage. An original coat of paint on here. What I did, I sprayed them black. You see how hollow they are. And then I just held them in this dimension and just ran some silver down the front to give them kind of a three-dimensional steel look. I'm not sure I like it yet. And what I'll do, once this dries, I'll get a couple of coats of clear and then sand off the high spots. I want them to have a little bit of a rough look. I mean, it's supposed to be steel and not supposed to be polished paint, but I kind of like the way that looked. It was similar to Miss Ashley. It has a nice, adds a little three-dimensional look to it anyway. Hey, what I want to lay out, and I only have a very short amount of time, I'm trying to do this in segments. I did some detailing around the cockpit, and I want to add the appropriate lines and rivets to the top of the fuselage once I answer the phone. The areas where we have to fudge a little bit because our fuselage is a different dimension here, but I want to include these little, and I'm sure these are Zeus fittings that allow this panel to come off, and some rivet lines down in there. We're going to have to improvise that because we're not exactly scale here. Speaking, Mike Kajeski, the rat, he had these brand new pens all along. Look at these pens, they never had to have had ink in them. He brings me over a set of pens and he says, happy birthday. Anyway, he says he used this ink last time. See, this says it's 3071F for acetate and film. This is better than the ink I have. It looks like it. I did a little test here just to see for myself. I put some in one of the pens, and boy, it seems like nice ink. So maybe this is a little upgrade. Now, to really rub it in, and Mike is my best friend, but boy, he rubs it in. He tells me he was up at Pearl, and they had this whole set of pens on sale for $55. Mike, not funny. Anyway, he doesn't know it yet, but he's donated them to our cause. Usually I use a little piece of tape, and again, especially when I'm doing partials. I call this a partial day. Now, let's see, Mike's pen's probably right 100 times. Sure, they're perfect. Mike, it's the same as saying money talks. Anyway, you can just see how quickly the rivet lines go on. We're going to finish up the Zeus fittings here. Zeus fittings have a little cross in them. Now what I've been doing is working pretty much from the tail to the front. My goal was that tonight I could finish the fuselage, and then the next thing would be that in the next couple of days I would be able to do the wing. I saved the wing to last because the wing is the most labor intensive. But if a plane were to be in one piece while you were doing this, it wouldn't be that way. It would be that every part of it is difficult. You wouldn't get any free ride. With a take-apart plane, there's just a lot of steps where it's a lot easier. Now that's really close, I mean not scale prototypical, but it's when you look at it from certain angles and then you look at how a real plane is, it kind of does capture that look. Now the next thing is, and we're going to do the other side of course, is this line carries right up to the spinner. And then all these lines here we're going to do one by one, try to lay them out. But notice how the Zeus fittings are there. It's rivet lined and Zeus fittings. So we're going to try to do a little bit of a fudge replication on that. And this is where you've got to kind of lay it out in tape first before you go and do anything else, or else you wind up with a problem. Wanted to mention how nice, I can't believe how nice these pens are working. And a lot of times, it's easier to do the ink work upside down. A lot of time, boy, just having a plain and take apart mode is so nice. Anyway, the reality of any ink job is you got to kind of improvise. Now this part of the fuselage right above the canopy is not really scale. I've said that before, but I've tried to interpolate and make it look something like what it would look like if you took Mr. Gumby and stretched it or pushed it in other directions. And I know the master of that, the master of doing that is Al Raby, and I can pick up some of that information from his videos of just how well he was able to do that over the years. And it's amazing. It's an amazing talent of looking at things. Now, especially in the ink line area, you can't really make them scale because the fuselage isn't scale. You've got to do that Gumby thing. Anyway, one of the things I wanted to mention real quickly here, I want to finish this line of ink. This part of the job, just hour after hour after hour, I try to do it, you know, in shifts that I'm not getting myself crazy. But while I was doing this the other day, I was running through some of the film, and I ran through some film of Mike Haravich. Now, Mike Haravich passed away years ago. He was very instrumental when I did the newsletter. Both him and Chuck Holzapfel did virtually all the typing and editing, which John Pothier does some of for me now. Some of, all of, I guess. But he was such an underappreciated guy. And I was looking, as we do on every tape, we try to look at some of the people that years ago were instrumental in my career or my modeling life, and paid him a little homage. And Mike Haravich, this year, was 92. He had just finished what at that point in time was his finest plane, kind of an air racer looking plane, and we were really excited about seeing him qualify, and he flew the best that I can ever remember him flying, and I have that on tape. We're going to put that on somewhere in before the end of this tape. I've been trying to save that for an appropriate time. We're about at that time now because voila, if you look, once this ruler comes off, I'm finished right up to this point here. This is a good time to take a break and check out Mike's flight. And please keep in mind, Mike Haravich, over the course of many, many years, supported the Pampa newsletter in a way that few, if any, people since him have done. And he did it without ever wanting or getting what I think would be the proper, appropriate recognition. So Mike, we definitely do owe you one. And this is Mike's flight from the 92 Nats.
Another one, which is better? He was going to send you one.
I never got it, though.
No, he probably will.
Mike Haravich of Honey Oak Falls, New York. It was. Authentic. Say, hey, world. You're a superstar. Lawrence of Westover. Lawrence of Westover. Mike Haravich. Pattern Master, Big Jim 60. Almost pool time. It's getting there. Uh-oh, he must have Wendy's old glow plug in it. See when you shoplift the man's glow plug out of his neck, what happens? The junior, the senior, and the 5 open.
The 5 open, top 5 open, plus the junior winner and the senior winner get the flat.
name on it and then keep it for a year.
I didn't want to win it because I didn't have any room for it.
Gotta keep your priorities straight. San Jose though.
He's either, he and I'm going to be third. Right now I'm third and he's fourth, but after that flight we could switch. We probably switch. That would be good.
Who's the top guy? Archie?
Then Robbie.
Archie, Robbie, then you?
Me, then Jose, or it could be Jose and me. Then Rick.
You're ahead of Rick right now?
Yeah, I beat him.
Terrific. you those memories of Mike. Significant stuff. Anyway, I'm trying to make these lines the thickest of all. These separation lines, because these are the ones that, and we're going to have to fudge here a little bit because I want to use this as one of my ink lines. So I'm trying to hide these by making them look like they are part of the ink lining. And we don't know how successful that's going to be. But anyway, here's what I do is try to do one side, then work on the other side. Work on one side so I can balance it off. And it looks like these, even though this is a fudge job, it's kind of simulating and it kind of ends at a logical spot. But once we put the whole plane together, we're going to find out if this is exactly how we want to have it or if we want to add to it. So for right now, I'm going to do the other side, then lay out the Zeus fittings up here into the nose. Now the exhaust outlet is, obviously it's a, I'm dropping the material. And there's a little triangle-shaped piece at the back. So I want to simulate this with an ink line before I put the exhaust in, of course. Oh, I just outlined that just to show that that's where the exhaust would go and that little lip in the back. Let's see, I have a spare set of manifolds. Now, one of the things I can do here, because it really is an easy way to simulate this, the exhausts are going to be black. I was thinking I could backmask this and paint it, but it'll be just as easy to do this. Since we're going to have it covered with clear anyway and have it all buffed before we put the exhausts on, I'm just doing a color by numbers thing. And if I don't like the way that looks, it's really easy. I can mask it off and just paint it black. Now I'm just looking at this, and there's one other thing I want to try to simulate, and I can't do it in scale, is this hatch down here. So what I'm going to do with it and try to make it scale, I'm going to make a piece of 64th plywood, make a template for that part, a unique template. What would be pretty good is if I could, in interpolating this, I can get this to cover the exhaust or act as part of that. Now, anytime you make a part out of 64th plywood, you need to dress the edges off. And we need to cut a hole in the middle of it. Basically just cut a hole so I can put tape on it. Ordinary 64th plywood, you can make all the templates for any odd size thing you need. Now I'm trying to locate this at a half prototypical spot. The only trouble is it's going to be difficult because I don't have a way of taping this in place. So rather than doing this with tape, what I'll do is I'll just hold this by hand. Famous last words. Normally I would just put a piece of tape there. But since I'm going over, get the pen right, maybe I'll have to do one line at a time here. Anyway, I hear that magic sound that Karen makes when supper is ready. So I guess this is the last that we're going to get done tonight. We'll try to, now here's a typical thing that happens. I've got a rough line there that I don't like. The two choices are, of course, I'll be right up, Karen. Knowing how to get rid of some lines that you don't want, probably just as important as knowing how to get some on there. What I'll do is I'll do one line at a time, let it dry. What happened? I didn't have that part of it really as clean as it should be. But now what I can do is just take this piece of tape and I can give it one of these. And what I'll do is let each edge dry, and as each edge dries, go to the next one and move the tape. I'm going to finish this up tomorrow. That's about all the fun we can have. Now I need to look around and see what other parts of this I want to add to. Now one of the things that adds a nice little dimension is notice the rivet lines on this line are wider spaced than the ones on top. So it adds some interest. Not only the thickness of the line, but the rivet spacing, the Zeus spacing. And because we have to do a lot of interpolating and having that parting line come right up to the front, that looks particularly, adds a little dimension of realism to it. Just looking down the line and trying to pick up things that I think would be, that is some rivet lines going down from top to bottom. I'm going to lay those out next. Try to figure out what pattern I want to use. But always referring back to the drawing, because the overall thing is that from far away or while it's flying, Can I give him to Buzz Brodak? From having the plane on the ground or in the air, and then to picturing what the real one looks like, well, we're just looking around, and we still have a whole list of details to do. Nose art, letrosets, things like that. But I'm right at the point where I'm looking at the inking part of this and trying to decide where, if anything, we need some more inking. And sometimes this just can take up a little bit of time. You just need to, what I'm going to do now is have a cup of coffee, sit back and look at the books and just try to decide where and how I want to add more detailing to this, if I need more detail at all. And luckily I have plenty of books to refer to. What I want to try to represent next, a couple of these smaller hatches and things around here, and I'll try to work off the drawing, but also the rivet lines that go top to bottom. Now, the way they made these planes is with formers, and then they riveted the skin on, so there's some lines of rivets, but the key thing is not to make them all the same. These are all at a certain spacing. These we want a little wider spacing. And then what I'll do is before I decide I've had enough ink lines, I'll go up to the Spitfire bedroom, kind of look at the ink lining patterns on those planes and see which were the most effective and which I want to replicate. So now, even though this isn't totally scale, because our nose is not scale, I can pick up the look and the feel of it. A little trick on the rivet spacing is, in this case, I'm going to use a thinner pen and skip every other one, just to add some visual interest to this. And that looks a lot more realistic than when they all start to look the same. It starts to look, well, less realistic, I think. So in this case, I just do every other one. Gotten to the point where I'm closing in on having all of the lines pretty much the way I want them. And one of the things I want to kind of replicate here, again I'm looking at the books, is the exhaust stain from the exhaust. I want to try to replicate that, just it's a little bit different. Well, I guess what's the most appropriate thing is with the airbrush, I got the pressure way down. I just want to fog in the lightest little bit. I don't want this to be an overbearing thing. I didn't want to overdo it here. I just wanted to just leave a little hint of the exhaust stain. And when we actually put the exhaust manifolds in place, I think that'll kind of look, I think it'll look a lot more realistic, obviously, than it does now. There's no substitute for just doing a little bit of dusting on. That's what's nice about an airbrush. This would be impossible to do with a bigger gun. I noticed Al Raby had these stains on a lot of his models. I thought that added a nice little realism to it. Not that his models need a lot of realism added to them, but... I'm not sure how accurate that really looks. When you look at how a prototype... So when we get a coat of clear on it, we'll see how that jumps out. Just one more little detail we can add. At the magazines and books and everything, I'm trying to get the color. What I noticed is the Typhoon, the exhausts, are like a rust color. You know, it's pretty obvious to me they weren't chrome plated or anything. But what I want to do is, I'm trying to get a rust color. I've been mixing up some red and some yellow and some black, trying to make a rusty, and then I put a little gold in so it would be metallic. And what I just want to do is just hit just the tips, if I can, and see if that has the look I want. I'd like it to just look a little rusty, and then I want to put the exhaust stains on the end. Not sure if that does what I want it to. A lot of times you have to take it out into the sunlight, but it adds a little, I gotta put a little more yellow in the mix. As these dry up, I've been going back and forth trying to change the mix just a little bit, but you can see the idea is that they look a little three-dimensional. I think I've got it close, but you can always go back with that airbrush over and over again and mix up a rust-colored. One of the things I thought about doing is going down to this place where they sell HO train parts or Lionel train parts. They make these flow quill colors that simulate rusted train rails and stuff. Maybe that's what we're going to have to ultimately do to get it as realistic as we want. Now what I always like to do is do some highlighting or accenting with white ink. This is the one that I've had some luck with. Now, the thing with white ink, it doesn't work real well in the thin pens. You can make lines and dots, but it's difficult with a 5.0. What you really want to do is get the biggest pen, and out of this set it's the 120. The 120 will make rivet heads. The trouble is a lot of times you have to go over them twice or 3 times, depending, to get them. They don't lift. It's much more difficult than doing black ink, so I try to use it just for highlights, for like where things go through the invasion stripes. But it can be a real effective way of dressing up any plane with, you know, takes a little getting used to, but I don't think it's out of the range of anybody. As an example, what I did, I laid out the lines that I wanted to use, the lines and the rivets with the thin pen, but I know I have to go over them twice. I go over them after they dry, and usually after you go over it with clear, you really have to go over it again. And a lot of times what you need to do is do a scrub. A scrub means that you go back and forth. Now I'm going to do a scrub right here. And you see little imperfections back, 2 or 3 times to get the final result that you want. But it can really be effective when you get it to where you're happy with it. It takes a little, like anything worthwhile, it just takes a little extra time. Go to the next line, line it up. Everything that we do is predicated on if you're willing to spend the time, the result is doable. And what this does, it makes the lines as they go through the invasion stripes really stand out. You just need to do a scrub, go back and forth a few times. Another thing too, I would never leave the white ink in the pen overnight, since these are Mike's pens. As soon as I'm done for the day, I'll clean out all the pens with hot soapy water. It can be nasty stuff to get out the day after if you don't get it out right away. Again, it's not going to go on as easy as the black ink. It's just a given that it's going to be a little more work. But the result can really be outstanding. Now, I always like to look up in a Spitfire bedroom at what parts of the ink work look real effective. Some of them don't look effective, and some really do. Some really jump right out at you. So while this is drying, I'll get this white ink here and then try to make a decision what else I want to do on this. Now we got this last row to do here. Again, it's just a lot of times you got to let it dry, go back, let it dry, go back. Whoops, I just slipped there. Now, if you're unhappy with that for some reason, you just clear it right off. Most of the time after you put a coat of clear on, you really have to go back over the white. Now you can kind of look at this from a couple different angles. Now, if you happen to make a mistake or smudge a line, and I happen to just have some schmutz on my hands here, a little bit of alcohol, or with the white, it seems like Windex or even spit seems to work just fine. You can clean it off. And this is one of the options you have with ink, is I just wanted to see if I liked continuing the rivet lines or solid lines, and I kind of like the rivet lines a little better. So I just wipe these off with a Q-tip, and I can replace them bar for bar, or I can do some bars. It gives you a lot of choices. You're never locked in until you cover it with clear. And even then you probably could get it off, but you're not locked into one thing. Places I like the way it looks is when it goes through the the insignia colors. I think that looks particularly effective. The Spitfire bedroom, I'm looking at just some of the things. I'm going to start the wing tomorrow. Some of the things I wanted to replicate. Always good to have some ideas. And we're going to try to come up with some nose art. I thought the Zeus fittings were particularly good on being effective. Some of the white ink work, I thought the dots were really effective. The rivets, especially where they went through on the tail plane. Again, the white ink can be a pain to use. Having some models to look at, or just having some video to look at for some ideas on how you want to do it. And of course I try to make each one a little bit different, but some of the things carry over from one model to another, the hatches, the way the lines go. There's just certain things that really stand out. Some things kind of die. I like these Zeus fittings. Now I just noticed those are a larger circle over a smaller circle. See? That's the thing you forget all the time. You always forget it. Even if you don't have some models in mind, just having some video, maybe some of those appearance judging videos from the Nats, they can serve you well when it comes to trying to lay out the ink work. If you go with the traditional ink line work, just even something simple like that, it really does set a plane apart. Get the color right on these exhausts, the kind of brownish, goldish brown. Difficult though, difficult. A difficult color to make. Rust is not an easy color to make. But this is one of the things now I had forgotten is how much I like those Zeus fittings. So I'm going to try to replicate some of those on the body. I'm going to spend the rest of today working on a fuselage and then get a bright start tomorrow. I should be able to devote a whole day to doing the wing. So have any ideas, always important. And someday, the Typhoon will have its wall. We have a wall ready for a few Typhoons. Or for something, we don't know what yet. We're never sure what we're doing. I have another idea. I'm looking at the ink lining on these little Spitfire models. That can be handy too. Just Anywhere you can get some prototype ideas from, it'll always work. It'll always make any model more realistic, even if it's just a similar model, not the exact same one. Thing I wanted to do, because I want to put the fuselage aside to dry, I want to lay out some nose art here. And I'll do it very, well, relatively soon. I'm not sure what I'm going to do for design yet, but something right under the exhaust stacks, right in that area. Some pretty fancy nose art on the C5, but I want to come up with something a little different, always a little bit different. Trying to make up a little pattern for what we typically use as nose art. It's a little shield, which has kind of been a little tradition of Joe Adamusco and Wendy in our modeling. Anyway, what I'm going to try to do is place this appropriately, and I made half of this in 64th plywood so I could have a template. Now, the reason I'm kind of rushing this through is what I want to do right now. I want to back mask this and shoot this so it dries tonight. This is the last thing I'm going to do tonight, and then tomorrow I'll be able to do the rest of the lettering and working around there. And the whole idea of this is so this can be drying tonight, and then tomorrow I can work out whatever kind of detailing I'm going to put in there. Now this will definitely be the last thing we do tonight. I've already got the word from Karen, definitely made it clear. Anyway, I want to press this down just a little more. And tomorrow I hope tomorrow we're going to finish the fuselage. Made a nice little thing for the airbrush to hold it up, because this crazy thing, you can't put it anywhere. No matter where you put it, it falls down. What a genius. Anyway, I always liked having a little nose art on the plane. And I really get the feeling it's starting to do what I want it to do, is look like a Typhoon. What I love about Brodak Dope, one coat. See you tomorrow. This morning we've had a little change of plan, and what we're trying to do, I guess you can tell from the videos, is we're trying to work around getting Mike's plane into silver. I thought possibly I'd be able to finish up the ink lines on everything in the next day or two, but that's not going to happen. But we do have what I thought would be a better choice is I'll finish up the fuselage today, the letter sets and everything, and possibly if the weather breaks, I can get some clear on it. And I think maybe there's a point to this. The point is maybe it's always good to just finish up one part at a time, depending on what your time window is like, your time schedule. In this case, we're coming up on the part of the year where we hope we're going to be getting some flying soon. But again, you never know with this weather. I wanted to mention a couple of little things that can happen to you with using an airbrush. If you're not aware of them, you can run into a tentative problem. One of the things with an airbrush is, see we've airbrushed in this black. See how the tape is pulled off the paint? See, because when paint gets dusted on, very dry like that, it's very prone to having the tape pull it up. Now in this case it's not a big deal because we're going to refog this in so that the top of this little nose art has the exhaust stain, make it a little more realistic. But if you were to be doing a paint job where this was part of the trim, right now it'd be a problem. When you're putting airbrush paint on and very dry, just dusting it on, Always be aware that that tape has a tendency, and it'll do it quite often, no matter how many times you take the stickiness out of the tape. Anyway, what I'm going to do, I was trying to think of a nice little logo to put in here because I make my own nose art up, and I came up with something that I thought was cute, the Sato Squadron. So of course we're always trying to do things with a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek here. And I'm going to get out my Letrasets. First I have that little template here. And first thing I want to do is, and you only need half of it, I want to ink line around the edge of this, and that'll be relatively easy to do. A little plywood piece like this, you want to make sure this edge is perfectly smooth, because otherwise the pen will catch on it. And I want to put tape on both sides because I can flip it both ways then. And by making half a template, I'll probably get it pretty symmetrical, relatively symmetrical. I need to cut a hole so I can tape this in position. Line is drying. I can look through my Letraset, and I'll mention a couple of things here that I've been able to figure out. First off, I had this great thing here, Polish nose art. Give me some ideas, but unfortunately we're not going for this. We're going for the Sato nose art. But anyway, if you were trying to do something, these little sheets of nose art are available. Also, some of the things, if you're looking to make it real simple, you can buy these decals, or they're not decals, they're press-ons. You know, none of this is appropriate to a World War II Typhoon, so if we do a jet at some future time. Now, Frank McMillan had sent me these, I don't know what they call it. You need to use a little heat to release them. Dry sets. And they got, well, this plane had a Napier Sabre engine. Not going to use that. But anyway, you just have a lot of choices for other things. And that ProMark was one of them. I thought I had his address in here. But the point is, I always keep all this stuff that I have year after year after year in one box, so that I can go back. The idea being right now that I can pick the lettering for that little Sato Squadron lettering, and the lettering that's going to be under the cockpit. The pilot for this plane is going to be Captain Harold Price, and I want to look for some appropriate lettering. But what I do is, because every time you're done with a job, you always have something like this left over. Well, now that they don't make Letrasets anymore, the only ones I know of you can buy are the Tom Lay ones. Well, it's starting to look like we were pretty smart saving all this stuff anyway. But we do have some nice stuff. We just have to find, see, I can have each one by which plane it was done for, the Spitfire, the whatever. But had I thrown all these away, you know, right now I wouldn't have any of these choices. If you want to try some of these ProMark, these are the rub-ons. They look mostly like they would belong on a modern jet. Here's his information, phone number. And if I remember right, I think I got these from Frank McMillan, but he was using them successfully. They seem a lot thicker than Letrasets, and of course you're going to put several coats of clear on them, but worth a shot. This is a relatively thick ink line. Once it dries, I need to put the corners on with a fine pen. And believe me, after a couple of coats of clear and sanding, there's always some little spots that you come through on. And I'm very comfortable with the idea that I can just touch this up anytime I want, especially with the fine pen. I guess that's why it pays right in the beginning to just buy a set of those pens. Thing I wanted to do, I wanted to write out, and I thought it would be kind of nice, kind of tongue-in-cheek. The Sato Squadron. First thing I want to do is lay out, get some idea. And these are kind of the English Roman, I don't know what do they call them? Old English, Old Elliot lettering. Anyway, laying this out to get the letters evenly spaced is a little more difficult than it seems. Now, one of the nice advantages of working with a carbon fiber body, you don't have to worry about putting pen marks. You can press as hard as you want. You can't do that with other material. You can't do it with balsa wood, and you can't really do it with even e-glass. So having a carbon fiber, at least a fuselage part, and we hope. By the way, I've just heard from Dave, and they're going to be coming down in a couple of days to do the paint on the wing. And Mike's looking to finish his plane up as soon as he gets out of work. So we're going to put a little push on here, and I want to write the word Sato. So it's easier when you're working in a confined area to start in the middle. This is a good trick, and work your way out. Now, if you were doing a wood fuselage, one of the choices that would be good is to pre-release. In other words, ladies over wax paper. Now, I use an ordinary ballpoint pen, but they make all kind of fancy Letraset tools. Again, this is one of the things, practice is the essence of getting it right. So I would be willing to say it's a good idea on a thing like this, first to lay out and see that you have enough room for the letters. If you do, great. If not, you got to use small letters. Or the second choice would be start in the middle and work both ways out. And again, because it's carbon fiber, there's no way you can put a dent in it. You can't put a fingernail in it. Now I'm going to work this way and this way out from the middle. It's a good idea, because this is relatively quick, is to write out what you want to put Letraset on and have somebody who finished high school and wasn't dreaming about stunt ships or whatever edit it down. Many times I've gotten done and Karen will come by and go, "Hey, you spelled Sato wrong." Well, you know, she's got an education and I don't. Simple as that. Anyway, I try to lay these out in a way that kind of balance it out. But again, if you're wrong, what's nice, you just take some tape. If we get one on that's crooked or out of line, I always use the tape to line them up. And you always want to put that first coat of clear over this very dry, very little thinner. So I kind of think Sato Squadron 91 would be nice. And as far as I can tell, and I could be wrong, this is going to be the first plane built specifically for a 91 size motor. Okay, here's a good thing. We just had a bad one here. Well, that's not a problem. Take a piece of tape, take a little bit of the sticky off it, and just do it over. So now I got to move the tape down. When you're doing a wood fuselage, boy, you've got to watch you don't put dents in it. It's really a problem. Now the word squadron I'll have to write out in much smaller letters, of course. And I'm looking over the white Letrasets that I have left, because I want to write Harold Price's name up here, and of course maybe for anybody who might not understand that, when I was a young kid, Harold was very helpful. He had me over to his shop all the time, taught me many of the things that I know, and he was always very gracious about it, and a great sportsman, so we want to give him a little of the credit he deserves. By the way, I know Pat Johnson is working on the plans to his original Valkyrie. Anybody looking for you guys that are real tied up with this nostalgia thing, that is a great plane. Trust me, I had one. Okay, so what I'm looking for is some white lettering, and I got to make sure, see, because we can't buy these anymore, they don't make them. I got to make sure I have two of everything for the word Captain Harold Price. So I need to go through this, and if I don't, then I go to Plan B, the second choice of the lettering. You always have to make sure you have enough lettering to start with. It happens because this is the sheet that my first choice is. I'm going to run out of O's. I don't have enough O's, but I can take a Q and from the back, just with a razor blade, scrape the little tail off. And that'll give me enough that I can do these. Go. What I also did, because I don't want to forget it, I put tape from the inside of the fuselage to seal off the cockpit area, because when I hit this with clear, I don't want to have the clear get up inside the cockpit, so I just sealed that from the inside.